So the New York State Board of Real Estate Appraisers called a meeting for order Wednesday, May 1st, 2024 at 1 p.m. If we could just go through and do a quick, say that I'm here, Steve Farrell, Board Chair.
Susan Baldwin.
Lillian Levy.
Jody Bilal, Department of State.
Candace Burchett, Department of State.
Norma Rosario, Department of State.
Shannon McGuire, Department of State.
Allison Lacey, Department of State.
Ernest.
Ernest Delaney, Department of State.
David.
Dave Mossberg, Department of State.
Thank you. Jerry.
Jerry Urick, Appraisal Qualifications Board.
Okay, welcome everybody. Going through agenda item 1, we did the roll. We do not have a quorum at this point. Can I call for the approval of the summary meeting notes without a quorum? No? Okay. So item A, calling for approval of the May 12th, 2022, August 3rd, 2023, November 16th, 2023, and the February 13th, 2024 meeting summaries. I will void because we do not have a quorum. Moving on to agenda item 2, department reports, enforcement. Ernest Delaney, New York City.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. This real estate appraisal board meeting enforcement report would cover the period from February 2024 to today. During that time period, we received a total of 17 new appraiser complaints. Over that same period, we completed the investigation on 27 complaints. Of those 27 complaints, the dispositions include 10 complaints in which we closed the investigation due to no violation or no merit, and 17 cases in which we referred to our counsel office with the recommendation of disciplinary action. Our current appraiser complaint caseload is 38 cases. I would just note that we continue to receive a number of complaints from Fannie Mae. In fact, when I look at the new complaints we received, 41% of the new complaints are referrals by Fannie Mae. And their allegations includes issues regarding inadequate comp adjustments and the use of physically dissimilar comp cells. That concludes my enforcement report.
Ernest, so I have a question. Of the 41% coming from Fannie Mae, so if we're talking about 27, roughly talking about 11 or 12 complaints coming directly from them?
Well, yes, I would say that, yes.
Okay,
Yes,
so
of the new
so
complaints that's coming in.
So if there's 12 of those, how many of those are being closed without merit? Do we know?
Well, these are the new complaints, so they're still being investigated. But if we look at the ones that have been closed over that time period that I just mentioned, that since February, 17 predominantly of them are being referred to counsel. So
Okay.
we are finding reasons that we would want to take action against the appraiser with those complaints.
I don't know if this is a possibility, but in your next enforcement report, is there any way we can segregate those just to see how they're going? Because I've heard from individual appraisers that they're getting violated by Fannie Mae, and there's no foundation for it. So I just would like to know individually if we can kind of isolate those. Is that possible?
Just from the ones that are Fannie Mae complaints, how many we do close, and what's the disposition of
Correct.
those cases?
Yeah,
Okay,
just
yes.
those cases. All right, I appreciate that. So it just gives us some kind of basis for some of the phone calls that I'm getting.
Yes.
All right, thank you, Ernest, I appreciate that. Are there any questions for the board members of Ernest?
No.
It's from the agency? Okay, thank you very much, Ernest, we appreciate your efforts. Okay, processing report, Emily Loopy?
Emily's not here.
Emily's not here.
No, so she wanted me to just announce that, as usual, there's statistics in your folders. It'll show a comparison of the licensees from last year to this year. broken down by class code and I believe county. Looks like from last year at this time, there's a 5% reduction in the number of licensees. I think the year before, I had asked her, with the year before, I think the year before was a 1% decline. Any questions about that, or is there different information you may be looking for future meetings, Steve?
No.
Do you think that's good? Okay.
Board members, question of Jody?
I have one. So, it is, I'm just looking quickly. But, so certified, if I look at 2023 compared to 2024, you're saying 603 appraisers. And then now it's down to 531. What is that? And then you've got 3409. So it seems like there's almost a little bit of a reduction across the board with all of them.
Yes, yep, it's for all of them overall, 5% reduction, yep. And the first column shows the original applications and the ones that were renewed. And then over on the right is the total number. So
What
there's a
about-
reduction, it looks like to me, the biggest reduction is the appraiser assistance, but I didn't analyze it that closely, but just a quick review.
Okay.
That's what it looks like to me.
Okay, all right, great, thank you.
Okay, any questions for anyone else? Thank you, Jody, for the update.
We have another board member joining us.
Oh, thank you, Ernest.
Yes.
Hi Chanel, how are you? Thank you
Doing
for
well.
coming.
I have a visitor. I'm sorry. She's out of school.
That's okay.
Love
We're just getting done with section two of the agenda. We just got done with report B. If you have any questions of Ernest, if you want to go back, Chanel?
No.
Okay. So we can continue. We're on section 2, item C, continue education audit. Allison Lacey.
Good afternoon. The Bureau of Educational Standards is conducting continuing education audits. We randomly select the percentage of monthly renewals and all rate renewals for this audit. For the months of January 2024 through April of 2024, we conducted a total of 37 audits. 27 have complied and 5 are still within the time frame to respond. Are there any questions?
When you do an audit, do you ever find anybody that doesn't really have their education up to par? You do find some?
Yes, but it's a very low number for appraisers. It's very low.
Okay.
You're finding that everyone's finding it easier to find a fair appraising class?
The Fair Housing, Fair Lending
Yeah.
course, yes, we have quite a few approved schools that offer that course, and they're able to take a computer-based live distance education or the classroom, so they have flexibility in how they can actually obtain those required hours.
Okay, very good. Chanel, any questions?
No. No, thank you.
Allison Lacey? Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, thank you very much, Allison, for that report. Okay, section 3, new business. AQB Pereira. Jerry Urick is here to answer any questions you might have. Jerry, you want to do an introduction or a background or anything you might require at this point?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, sir, my introduction, first off, I'll say thank you very much for this opportunity to meet with the board. We at the AQB are very excited to speak with you today about the FRIA program and answer questions that you have. I am a AQB member, of course. I am the vice chair currently of the Appraisal Qualifications Board, and I am a certified residential appraiser. I work for a large national bank personally. So been in the real estate appraisal profession for 37 years, if that helps you for a background for myself. And certainly very excited about Perea. That's one of the reasons I joined the Appraisal Qualifications Board, was to really help move Perea from ideation to realization. And so I think we've certainly achieved that, at least with one provider so far, with other providers still working on their programs. So, and again, happy to answer questions or go through a slide presentation, but I know we've done that already, so.
All right, yes.
I'm good. I told you, yeah.
Yeah, we've gone through this a number
Gone
of
through a number of
times.
times. All right,
We
so I'm
just
gonna,
can't seem to vote on it.
because we can never have a quorum. All right, so Jerry, I have a couple. So you've been involved with this since the infancy, correct?
Yes.
So how many states or regulatory areas have passed this so far?
That's a great question, Mr. Chair. Currently, there are 49 states and jurisdictions that have, one way or another, adopted Perea. There are only 2 states that have yet to adopt. That would be Georgia and New York, as well as Guam, Northern Marianas Islands, Puerto Rico, and the Virgin Islands. So, as I mentioned, I think some of your team yesterday when we were talking about qualifying education, we don't want to see New York be the last state to adopt. We certainly want to see you beat Georgia to that.
We are just hoping to hold out.
So,
Georgia sends the pizza if we're last.
yeah. So,
They could, so from just your reflections, and we've been around this a couple times, but just because you're on the forefront of this, your reflections from the other jurisdictions that have passed, is there any things that you're seeing that they're saying could have been done differently, could be addressed differently, have done it differently? We're just trying to get a framework. We're already within a framework, but if there's shortfallings, maybe we can get out in front of it before we pass it. Is there anything in your experience that you're seeing?
Mr. Chair, I have not actually. So it's been, there have been discussions just like this one that we're having today with some of the boards to make sure that they understood, the Perea program, and so that those that had to take it before their legislatures had the appropriate talking points to move it forward. But I haven't seen anything from a lessons learned saying, gosh, I wish we would have done something differently. I think we really did, I think, a good job of promoting, the Perea program itself, or the Perea, I think idea, and as well as making sure that state boards have a good understanding of it. We've been to many, trade and industry functions to make sure that anyone that has questions about it has those answered. One thing I will share with you, in speaking with that large state out west called California, when we were discussing Perea with them, one of the things that that they had talked about, I'm sorry, actually not California, Nevada, because I know California and Nevada, we were talking with both of them, but actually with Nevada, Nevada was concerned that, if they didn't adopt in a timely fashion, that they would actually be granting licensure to individuals that are coming from California and are applying because they have that reciprocity. Nevada has reciprocity with California. That in essence, if you have an individual that has taken a Perea program and it was approved in California, Nevada, by virtue of the reciprocity, would be having to approve those programs. So, I think that was one of the things that we'd heard from a couple different states in Nevada most recently about, they're gonna, if we don't adopt it, we're still going to be approving individuals through reciprocity that might have, taken that education or that experience, through Perea.
Yeah, actually, that was a point we discussed at one of our previous meetings, concerns about New York State having open reciprocity with like Pennsylvania, Connecticut, and the idea that they're obtaining their license in a pathway that we haven't cleared yet. So I'm glad you brought that up. And I had a question I totally blanked on what I was gonna ask you. Anybody else besides me? Oh, actually, you know what? Before I do forget, I wrote this down. So in other governing jurisdictions, like in any type anything that's introduced in a new phase, the governing agency, you guys have suggestions or guidelines or training? Like if I work with the Department of State, say in the telephone answering area, and you get phone calls on this, because it's new, there's going to be stumbling blocks that just naturally happen. Is there some advisement, video training, narrative information that you might be able to pass along to us so we can utilize that to train our individuals that are answering questions?
About the PREA program, I'm presuming you're asking, Mr. Chairman?
Correct, yes.
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 Yes, we do have, various different methods to, inform the general public about PREA. And so one of those obviously is, the website is chock full of information, but I can make sure that I take back your requests to the staff at the Appraisal Foundation and ask that they provide you with I think the best appropriate way to, help you with those call center type questions or whatever you might need.
Yeah, the reason I say that, because when we do something new, and I'm sure it's not something specific to New York State, the board members get a number of phone calls asking questions, and the board members always defer them back to DOS. We have well-trained staff, but with something new like this, especially something that's very new, we would like to be as qualified as we can to answer questions.
Makes
Does that help?
perfect sense, Mr. Chair.
Always, everything helps.
Yes.
Do we have an obligation to get this passed by a certain time?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question? I didn't hear it.
Do we have a time frame that we must pass this past PREA so that we can get moving on?
I'm not aware of a time frame for you, but I would just certainly point out that sooner the better for the purposes of those that within your state that are looking to utilize that particular experience path to licensure. So I think that it would certainly benefit those potential or upcoming appraisers in your jurisdiction. So.
We are just beginning to see a higher percentage fall off, even the numbers we're seeing today. Are you seeing in other states that we're experiencing that they've introduced this? I don't know if there's enough of a data base in which to answer the question. You find that that fall off is starting to the increased number of people applying and passing through is beginning to increase because of the influence of PREA?
I've heard, again, anecdotally, but I'm sure at the foundation, the staff can give you some more hard numbers. But I have heard anecdotally that, with the adoption of PREA and the provider, one provider at least so far coming out with a program, that has really spurred more interest, especially from a diversity and inclusion perspective. So we are hearing from, states, saying that, that there are, individuals asking more about PREA and how they can get involved in it and whether or not their state is, has adopted it. Obviously, there's I think a decent cohort already through the one provider's, program so far that they're getting close to, graduating. So I think that there's, again, anecdotally, that there's certainly individuals saying, yeah, this is great. We really like the fact that we have this option and that it'll help, bring more, qualified candidates into the industry.
Is there a time frame after it's passed? Can you guys hear me?
Yes, they can hear you.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Is there a time? But once it's passed, what is the time frame when it will actually be implemented? And is there going to be like a regional director or someone with the Appraisal Foundation that corresponds with that region to get this done or something like that?
I presume your question was for the board, not for me?
Yes. I'm sorry, yes, it was for the board. I was just trying to get an idea of,
Sure.
Once we pass it, what is the time frame it would take to actually implement it? Is it like 6 months, a year? So we pass it today, and then when do we actually see this in?
That's you or David. Yeah, that's Jody or David.
So it will really depend whether, there's a rulemaking process and it depends if there's a statutory requirement, and I'll let Dave speak about the statute and regulations. Programmatically, it depends on what's being changed. There's a difference between accepting it fully and accepting it with additional
Right.
requirements. It really depends. Can't give you a time right now. Dave can probably speak to the length of time once the board votes on it to when it could potentially become effective. Dave, if that.
Again, what you were sort of mentioning, it really depends in part on whether or not we believe we can achieve implementation entirely through a regulatory process, versus having to go through the state legislature, on, some sort of legislative change. What we had discussed previously were some concerns, that we had raised with respect to, like, for example, like, is there a conflict between state law and the definition of something like a real estate appraisal assistant and the supervisor versus the mentor, I believe is the term of art used for the Piraeus application. And so, if there are conflicts and we're not sure also like whether or not we're just, as Jody's saying, implementing everything or making changes to it, that might require a legislative change before the board could take any action. If, however, we're comfortable that, or maybe if there's like additional information from the AQB on there is no conflict, or that mentors could be supervisors, and that there's no restriction on like how many, because we have a law and the executive law that limits it to 3. Assuming that there are all these things that are worked out and we could do it regulatorily, generally speaking, there's going to be, I would say, at least a 9 month to at least a year minimum before implementation. That's because the regulatory process requires us to get, board approvals on votes of the actual rule tech that would be implemented. It's got to go out for a public comment period, depending on comments, if any, we receive. It may have to come back to the board for another vote. Then there has to be an adoption period. And then, obviously program needs time, and I would defer to Jody on things like what forms need to be created and updating, investigative staff and processing staff and phone bank staff and, all of those sorts of requirements that would have to be addressed that we would build into the implementation process. So, I mean, best case scenario, assuming the board, wants to move forward and accept Piraea as another means towards certification and licensure, and then, sort of figuring out any sort of conflicts. Best case scenario, like I said, maybe 9 months to a year, but that might be generous.
Thank you.
So David, question while we're in this arena. If we were to accept it as it's now versed, only to find out 2 years down the road, there's an area we need to change, would that be a housekeeping change at that point?
I mean, again, assuming we're doing it regulatorily, obviously it's much easier to change a regulation. So, and depending on like what sort of issue was uncovered, we could, there's something that allows a regulatory agency to change a regulation through what's called a consensus rulemaking process in New York. So if it was sort of like a de minimis change where we reasonably concluded that no person is likely to object to whatever change we, wanted to change, as you're calling, like if it's a housekeeping problem, we could try to do that regulatorily, which shortened the regulatory process tremendously. But it's hard to sort of give you a good answer on like a hypothetical such as that.
Right, I know at one point, I've been around way too long now, there was some discussion between educator and mentor when we first opened up apprentices. We changed the language with the apprentice law, and we changed the definitions, but we didn't do it, wasn't a new bill. We did it in a housekeeping. housekeeping bill, but I'd have to go back and look at it. That's one of the things I wanted to talk to Whitney about today when I got her, was that particular question, but I can get that answer from her. It just gives us some framework, so. Because I think most of the board members, and I'm speaking probably just for myself, or maybe all of them, I think we're fairly comfortable. I mean, we've really vetted this thing. We just need to get a quorum.
Right.
And we get a quorum, we can vote.
We were in agreement in December.
Yeah, we really were in December, and then again, we were in agreement with the fact that we had gone through it, everybody had done their homework and their diligence, and we were ready to pass it. And Jerry just, kind of solidifies that with the information that he gave us today. So I think we've really gone around this. And the time frame is probably the only question a lot of people have left. And you kind of answered that today.
Steve, I have a question for you. Do you still have concerns, not concerns, but do you still have questions regarding the points that were made at the last subcommittee meeting that might be helpful to ask Jerry today?
No, I mean,
Or is
those
that
are just more, again, those are just definite, I mean, he's answered kind of the questions that I had. Jerry, I had some concerns with, so in New York State, we have legal definitions of educator, and I'm gonna use supervisor, appraiser, and then mentor. And sometimes we have a tendency to kind of intertwine the definitions, and there were some concerns about the fact that the mentor, of pararia, and excuse me, I always mispronounce that. The mentor definition was not as aligned with our supervisor. But I think at this point, in going through everything and seeing the extensiveness, and I'm referring back to Scott for a second, the Appraisal Institute had come in and answered a lot of our questions. And I think once we got into it, at least from my own perspective, I think those definitions were less concerning. And that's where my question comes back to David today. If we get 2 years into this and find out that there's a void that's concerning, is it now going back to legislation, or can we make the alterations on a housekeeping bill? And I think some of my previous history is that we can make alterations on a housekeeping bill. So the concern is that the mentor doesn't have the same professional qualifications as a supervisor. Because in New York State, to be a supervisor, you have to be licensed at the same level as your apprentice. And there was some concern about the definition of mentor and how it was loosely defined within the pararia descriptions. But I since that stems back from a July meeting of last year.
Right.
I think since we've dug into this more and more, we can see that the providers are tightening up those perspectives within their own ranks. So I guess my question to David, and I guess I get my own question, is if we do find a void, look, diligence as board members over an occupation is diligence as people within the occupation. If you see something that doesn't seem like it's going to strengthen the occupation, and the possibility of, and again, my idea of sitting on a board is that you represent the general public, who not necessarily understands. It's not like you're saying, I'm having an appraisal done like I'm going to pick up my dry cleaning. When you have an appraisal done, the person that comes to your house has got to be held to a standard. And the boards that govern those individuals are held to those same standards. So if we see something that looks like it's going to be either misleading or confusing to the general public, as a board member and as a chair, your diligence responsibility is back to that general public. So don't feel that any of the questions asked is something specifically to the provider or the individuals. But over the last 6 months, I think we've gotten enough answers that we can feel comfortable with the question that Jody asked me, because I was the person that was bringing them up. I think over the last 6 months, I think we've gotten enough information, and we see that some of those areas that we might not be a void are being tightened up by the providers. That's a long answer to her short question.
So if I could just point out like one thing, because you had referenced the term void. Void in my mind suggests an absence of a rule or authority versus a conflict.
Okay.
So if there's a void, again, and it's hard not knowing the exact circumstances of a particular hypothetical, but a void more likely than not would likely be able to address regulatorily because the board does have extensive regulatory powers. The board's powers, however, cannot be used to cause a conflict with the enabling statute, meaning we can't make a regulation that violates the executive law or an applicable provision of a governing federal provision. So long as the issue that you're concerned about is a void, basically an area that's not sort of accounted for, more likely than not, we could probably do it by a regulation. Where it's a conflict of laws, generally the statutes will always win.
Right, and I think the concern lied with, I think maybe void is the wrong word to use, but it was the definition not being specific enough. But, once you pass it and you start to see the actual application of the individual responsibilities, I think that itself should take care of the situation. So I guess you answer my question. If there's definitions that aren't specific enough after the application, we can go back and redefine the definition because of the void.
Again, it's hard to give a good answer under the hypothetical, but I would say more likely than not, we would agree with you, yes, or I would agree with you.
All right.
Okay.
Anybody else have questions besides me?
And Mr. Chairman, I would just add on with the comment about the qualifications of the mentors. Not only, to your point, not only do the providers, they've not only ratcheted down, but they've provided good information to the AQB around the qualifications of those mentors. So we do review that as we're reviewing PERIA programs to ensure that they're, obviously, real estate appraisers, that they have the appropriate qualifications as set forth in the criteria. And again, we're looking that they have those same qualification requirements, for ethics and competency that supervisory appraisers do. So that's, again, I think we're all on the same page, looking to make sure that we do have qualified individuals performing that task.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, Jerry, with you here and David here, a lot of the information David and Jody have provided an abundance of information, but having you here also puts some directive to some of our questions. So it was good for our own knowledge. Okay, does anybody have any other questions of Jerry? Jerry, you're more than welcome to hang around. We have a party afterwards, but unfortunately, you're wherever you are.
Unless you have anything else for me, I'm happy to stick around if you have any other questions, but if not, I'll leave you to the rest of the fun parties.
Okay. Does anybody else have questions of Jerry? Jerry, thank you again. Your knowledge is well received. Thank you.
Sounds good. And I'll make sure that I'm following up with the staff regarding your action item for making sure that we have some materials for you for your call centers and anybody that has questions, that you guys are adequately prepared for those questions around PERIA.
Okay. Thank you again, Jerry. We greatly appreciate that.
Thank you. Thanks again.
Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Okay, so Jerry's now our new business order, public comment period. We have one person in public comment. You are?
Scott DiBiasio with the Appraisal Institute, and we are the only provider of PERIA in the marketplace right now. Our PERIA program was approved by the AQB for the licensed residential module back in September of 2023, and then followed soon thereafter by our certified residential module. We currently have about 150 or so folks enrolled in the program from around the country. And we have a list of about 1,700 people that have opened what we refer to as a readiness checklist. And that is where we verify all of their qualifying education and make sure that they've satisfied all of the requirements established by the AQB, so that we know that we can enroll them in the program. The last thing we want to do is enroll somebody in the program, take their money, have them spend the time, and then for whatever reason not be able to become licensed or certified. all indications are that those folks are moving through the program. They're actually finding it much more rigorous than anyone anticipated. We expected that it was going to take the average student, I guess is probably the best way to put it, the average student about 2 to 3 weeks to go through each of the 13 appraisal assignments that are included within each module. And it's actually taking them significantly longer than that. It's taking the average about 4 to 5 weeks. And our mentors that we have in the program, who are AI designated members, they have the MAI or the SRA designation. We also have some other qualifications that go beyond what is required of the AQB. So these are highly seasoned appraisers that have been in the profession for many, many years. Some of them are looking to be a mentor as not necessarily a second profession, but a way to round out their career and give back to the profession. Without saying the names or the ages of the folks, I can tell you that these are folks that have been around for a while and are well-respected appraisers. So we're hopeful to be able to convert all 1,700 of those folks that have completed a readiness checklist into actual PREA participants. But for whatever reason, they may have started a readiness checklist, and like I said, for whatever reason, they don't actually convert into being AI PREA participants. We actually had to pause enrollment for a period of time because interest was so strong, combined with the fact that our mentors were having to spend more time than they anticipated with each participant. They just did not have the capacity to be able to take on new enrollees until such time as we hired some additional mentors. And we have done that now. We have 5 full-time mentors on staff, and the 2 that just started are coming up to speed. They actually have to go through the PREA program themselves, obviously to learn all about it before they can start mentoring folks in the program. So those folks are going through that process, the onboarding process right now. I'm happy to say that we have 5 people enrolled in the AI PREA program that are on their final assignment. So we're hopeful to have our first graduates, if you will, from the LR module within the next couple of weeks, and perhaps even sooner than that. Those folks are all people who have taken their qualifying education through the Appraisal Institute. And I can tell you that while everybody that's a participant in the program is having difficulty, which is a good thing, by the way, it shows that they are being appropriately challenged to apply what they learned in the classroom or via their qualifying education to actual real-world appraisal work. So the fact that they're being challenged actually is good, because it's requiring that they go back and do additional research and learn additional things, and their mentor is helping them with that. But interestingly enough, we have found that the folks that are enrolled in the program that have gone through AI qualifying education are struggling less than the folks that have taken their qualifying education through other for-profit providers. Read into that what you want, but it's just the fact of the matter that folks that take AI qualifying education are having a little bit of an easier time.
Scott, leads me to a question. I was going to ask Jerry, but I'll ask you. Am I allowed to ask him questions?
Sure.
I just have one question. Other states that are utilizing PREA pathway, their states are using what for review processes? So in New York State, we require that you fill out a data log. In other data log, they ask for, say, 4 or 5 or whatever the concern number is now. What are they doing for a review process?
There hasn't been any state so far that has put in place any requirements for the submission of work product to the state for review. All 35 of the states that we refer to as being PREA ready, Jerry mentioned 49. There are still 14 of those states that are in the rulemaking process. and are not what we refer to being Perea ready. They'll come online over time. But of the 35 that are Perea ready, there hasn't been any state that has imposed requirements for their own level of review of the work completed within the Perea program. They're trusting to the providers that they are adequately reviewing the work product of the participant. But I can tell you that the final 3 assignments in each module have to be done completely independent and free from any advice or input from the mentor. And then they are sent out to an independent grading panel that reviews those appraisals for all kinds of different things, including USPAP compliance, utilization of appropriate methods and techniques, so on and so forth. So the appraisals that the participant is doing as part of the program are very highly reviewed before the participant can move on to the program. And I can tell you that it's sequential. You have to complete assignment number 1 and get it approved by your mentor before you can move to assignment number 2, so on and so forth. And then when you get to assignment number 10, you're on your own for the last 3. And those get independently graded by a panel that we have of graders. So it would be somewhat redundant, I think, for the state to impose its own layer of review.
So Dave, just so I can go back with you for a second. So that's what I mean about the differences in the pathways. If we're requiring someone in the traditional pathway to submit a certain number of reports, and we don't do it in the new pathway, and I'll just use those terms, is it not considered equal by law that we're asking from one group one thing and from a second group something else?
I mean, are you asking, is it like
Can we do it?
unlawfully like treating applicants differently? Or are you asking
Yeah,
like,
can we do it?
Sure. I mean, if we wanted
Yeah,
to,
But
sure.
it still goes back to, so their pathway is not asking for, that's something we would, so if you accept the pathway for what it is, which is almost fine by most of us, that's not covered in the pathway. So if we wanted to, if those are internal procedures, I don't see where it's any different from what, so there's 49 jurisdictions that have this now, and only 35 are utilizing it. Maybe that's a question for Jerry to say, look, of the 35, do any of them have individual requirements on review before licensing? And one of the concerns has been that we're treating applicants differently. Now, listen, I know that there's gonna be a pathway a lot of people are going through. But one of the concerns was it's not equal on both pathways.
It's not unusual for all our license types, regardless of which type. You either, this is a full path, this is a full path, this is your full path. It doesn't mean that they're exactly equal, they're individual. So in my non-legal opinion on this, Dave, yes, we could accept it fully without asking for reports if they're coming through area program. If we're doing the review where we're asking them for reports that they've been involved in with their supervisor, we can accept that and ask for those reports.
Okay, so we can do it for both, we can do it for both
Separate but
sides.
equal.
Yeah. All right, we can do it for both. And that's where Scott brings up a good point about they're at the end of their pathway, they're producing reports independently. Now, they might not be for a lending institution or a government agency, but they're gonna be under the same scope, same USPAP diligence that we always, and that's where part of the questions were coming from, the fact that we need to see what they're doing to make sure it meets the minimum standards in New York State. But like we just said, we can ask for those. Correct? Okay.
I think so, yes.
And I would, while I'm not encouraging this, if you wanted to see those final 3 reports, the participant who will at that point have graduated from Perea will have access to those reports and can certainly offer them to the state. I don't see a reason for it because it's going to be redundant. But if it gives you a greater level of comfort in moving forward, that you can actually see those reports, then we can make that happen.
Okay. All right, Scott, I have to thank Scott because I appreciate the fact that he's traveled twice to come down and under public comment has given us, again, we have another source of information to kind of put us at ease as to what we're doing, right? They can't answer questions, so.
Yeah, I did have one other issue that I wanted to address outside of Perea. But just to close the line of comments on Perea, I just would strongly encourage you to adopt Perea, start the rulemaking process, and hopefully, obviously that will take some time, and then eventually we can start to enroll folks from here in New York.
The board is committed to doing that, we haven't been able to get it over the finish line.
Yeah, and I understand the challenges with being able to get a quorum. I would encourage you not to add any additional New York State specific requirements to what is required, just because it makes compliance for us a lot more difficult. If we had 55 jurisdictions, each with their own individual requirements, we'd have to tailor the program for each of those jurisdictions, and it just adds significant costs and may actually make the program unviable.
Have you seen other jurisdictions do that?
No other jurisdiction has added anything above and beyond what is required by the AQB, and jurisdictions have said, as long as the program is approved by the AQB, we're satisfied with that. We don't want to open the box and look inside. The AQB did that for us. Now, that's not to say that
Oh, sorry. Can I ask a question though? In order to get AQB approval as a Perea provider or institution, the part of the program that you just described with respect to the final 3 reports being reviewed by an appraiser, is that an AQB requirement, or is that unique to you as the approved institution?
I know that the AQB requires that the final 3 assignments be done independently and reviewed for USPAP compliance. I don't know if the AQB requires that whomever it is that's reviewing those appraisals be completely independent from the mentor and the participant. That I'd have to get some additional information for you, Mr. Mossberg, but I can certainly do that. I just know what our program involves. And it was found to have complied with the AQB. So I'm guessing that those final 3 assignments have to be independently reviewed, but I'd like to verify that to be sure.
Thank you.
Is there
I
anything
just
else?
thought that was an interesting sort of dynamic.
No, and it's an interesting clarification. Are there any other questions of Scott? We picked your brain.
Yeah, no, this has been relatively easy compared to what I've gone through in some other states. So I did want to bring up one other issue, and Ms. DeLolo referred to this earlier about the 2026 AQB requirements for the fair housing, valuation bias, and equal opportunity course. And I'm sure you guys know this, that the requirements for the content of the course that is New York specific is different than the content that is required by the AQB. So as of right now, unless the content of the New York specific course is changed, somebody would have to take, beginning on January 1st of 2026, 2 different fair housing, equal opportunity evaluation bias courses. One to satisfy the New York specific requirement that had content that is based upon the outline that you have in regulation, and another course that was AQB approved and has the AQB required content. So by way of a suggestion, you may want to marry what is in your regulation with what is required by the AQB, so that somebody only has to take that 1 7-hour or 1 4-hour course every couple of years.
It's part of our.
Okay, all right, so what's the discrepancy? Is that the hours that we apply to it?
It's the course specific to New York that
Okay.
we have them take is different than what the AQB is
Okay.
requiring. But that's a whole big thing.
That's another tool.
The biggest difference that I saw was the requirement in the AQB criteria for there to be case studies. And I did not see that in the New York specific content requirements. So you've got a little bit of time, a year and a half or so, but as Mr. Mossberg indicated, the rulemaking process is a lengthy and convoluted process, so.
We're on it.
We got it.
That's all.
Okay.
If you're on it, you're on it, and then
We're on it.
I'll shut up.
Thanks again, Scott. We really appreciate the input. Okay, if there's nothing further,
Oh, I wanted to mention, the next board meeting, we're looking for August, so I'll send out to the board some potential dates in August.
okay, let's try hard to get a quorum so we can pass this.
I will do my
And if
best.
we need to try sooner,
Yeah.
we can do that.
Yes,
August
it's not
is
your
our free
guys'
month, so,
But
yeah.
If we need to try sooner, then we
If
can
you
do
wanna
more merit to
try
get the
something-
Utica location open. It'll be much easier.
If we
3 weeks, they're telling me 3 weeks.
I'm holding you hostage. I'm not taking a vote until we have a Utica location.
do you think that we should react quicker than August for
Well, it's
this?
just, we've been trying to vote on this since January.
It seems like
Well,
that's,
even, so even with, when we had to pass the USPAP standards, and remember we got pushed in December?
yeah,
We had an open, we opened up separate locations for people to go to. We just had, you have to advertise it. What's the time frame it has to be advertised? Like, we use my office, Carol and I were in my office, so we listed my office as an open public location. And I don't know if there's a specific time frame we have to do with that.
What's the publication?
I usually try to do the publication 2 to 3 weeks prior to the.
Okay, so let's suggest this. If we have to open up secondary locations in people's offices, to say, look, you can show up at these locations, no one's gonna show up most of the time, right? And we wanna pass this sooner, we wanna get a
Just
quorum.
announce that no one's gonna show up.
Well,
50 people waiting outside your office.
okay, that's fine.
But yes, we.
I have, my office is 8 by 8, they can all sleep in if they want.
I've got lots of room.
My suggestion is if we need to, if we wanna pass this, which I think we do we wanna go that route again to get locations for people to vote on so we can get it off the board?
Yes.
So, yeah, so Dave, so I think it's just that the location needs to be open to the public, is that it?
Yeah, it has to be open to the public where the public has an opportunity to see, observe, listen to, the public discussion pursuant to the open meeting laws. So it would be like unreasonable, for example, like if the 2 board members appeared and the audio is being played through like their headphones where only they could hear and observe the other board members. So long as, the public could participate, you could meet anywhere you want, really. I mean, there's cases that say you can meet like in airport lounges, so it's fine.
So let me ask you another question. We have a location in Utica, we have a meeting room, the equipment's there, it just hasn't been connected. I don't know if they have to put jacks in, I'm not sure of what needs to take place, but my question to you is, if we had it that location, opened it to the public, the board members each brought their own laptop, would they be able, would that,
Well, I mean,
Would that
you can
be
bring one laptop that's
approved?
large enough
Well,
for 3 people to sit there.
do you sit, your face, like,
We won't.
Sit back far enough.
I don't know, like, does everybody have to be on screen?
Is it that
Sorry,
specific?
if I'm putting you on the spot, we can talk about this offline.
I know, I didn't.
Yeah, I mean, the logistics of that, perhaps we should talk offline. I mean, as far as I
Okay.
understand, there's no real requirement that everybody be on the screen at the same time in an open meeting situation. So for example, like right now, when somebody in the Albany office is speaking, the camera automatically zooms in on that one person. And so not everyone is on the screen at the entire, for the duration of the meeting. What's important is that the members of the public are able to see and hear the members of the board that are speaking. And if there is, for example, a public comment, portion of the board meeting, just like as we have now, the members of the public are able to speak and participate if that's part of the meeting, part of the regular scheduled agenda. So, I mean, the best answer I could give is it depends on the actual setup.
Well, why don't we wind the meeting up and then
Yeah.
talk about it and get
All
this-
right, so you know what, this is more of a logistical questions that we can handle after the meeting's been adjourned. So if there aren't any other more questions, concerns of this board, I would ask for a motion to adjourn.
motion to adjourn.
Second. I have a second? Okay.
Second.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay.
thank you everyone for traveling, getting to the meeting, it's appreciated. And we'll see you all again either soon or at least in August.
Yes. Take care.
Thanks, everybody. Good, thanks, Dave.
Have a good day, everyone.
Sure.
Good day.